The summer heat had settled over the quiet suburban neighborhood like a heavy blanket, suffocating in its stillness. Inside the house, ceiling fans spun lazily, offering little relief. Elena, 38, moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, her bare feet silent against the cool tile. The house felt too large, too silent, a hollow shell of the life she once dreamed of. Her husband, Mark, had left early again, briefcase in hand, his goodbye nothing more than a grunt. He hadn't looked her in the eyes in weeks. Their conversations were reduced to logistical exchanges, groceries, bills, appointments. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cold familiarity that stung more than open hostility ever could. Elena paused at the sink, her hands submerged in soapy water, her mind elsewhere. She glanced at the clock, 3:15 p.m. Her son, Liam, had been home from college for 2 weeks. 19 now, taller than Mark, with the same sharp jawline but softer eyes. He'd been spending most of his days out with friends, or so he said. They rarely crossed paths. She preferred it that way, less chance for awkward silences or forced smiles. A faint ache pulsed behind her temples. She hadn't slept well. The heat, the tension, the weight of something unnamed pressing down on her chest every night. After rinsing the last dish, she sighed and unwrapped her damp apron, letting it fall to the counter. A quick shower, she thought. Then maybe, just maybe, a nap. Upstairs, steam filled the bathroom as she stepped out of the shower, skin flushed from the heat. She didn't bother with clothes. The house was empty, or so she believed. Wrapping herself loosely in a towel, she padded to the living room, collapsed onto the couch, and let her eyes drift closed. The towel shifted slightly, but she didn't notice. Exhaustion took her swiftly downstairs, the front door clicked open, Liam stepped inside, earbuds in, head down, scrolling through his phone. He called out once, no answer. Assuming the house was empty, he walked toward the kitchen, then paused. Something felt off. He turned the corner into the living room, and froze. His mother lay on the couch, towel barely clinging to her, eyes closed, peaceful and vulnerable. A jolt of shock rippled through him. He turned away instantly, heart pounding, face flushed with embarrassment. Without a word, he slipped back out, the door clicking shut behind him. Elena stirred but did not wake. Elena awoke with a start, her skin sticky from the lingering heat. Dazed, she sat up and adjusted the towel, only to realize it had slipped far more than she'd intended. Her heart thudded as she scanned the room. The living room door stood slightly ajar. A breeze stirred the curtains, but it wasn't the wind that unsettled her. Something felt off. She rose cautiously, securing the towel, and walked to the kitchen. On the counter lay a half-filled water glass, not hers. Her eyes narrowed. She hadn't left it there. A chill prickled her skin. Then it hit her, Liam. Her mind reeled. He must have come home. He must have seen. A wave of mortification crashed over her, stealing her breath. She gripped the edge of the counter, her thoughts spiraling. How long had he stood there? What exactly had he seen? Her pulse raced with questions she couldn't answer, and didn't want to. When Liam returned that evening, the house felt charged, the air heavy with unspoken tension. He barely looked at her as he muttered a greeting, heading straight to his room. Elena watched him retreat, her heart sinking. His footsteps echoed with awkward finality. Dinner was strained. Words felt foreign, clumsy. Liam stared at his plate, and Elena found herself stealing glances, searching for a flicker of recognition, of blame, or worse, curiosity. But his face gave nothing away. Later that night, she stood at her bedroom mirror, brushing her hair with slow, deliberate strokes. The reflection staring back at her looked unfamiliar, worn, uncertain. What had she done? No, she hadn't done anything. It had been an accident. A moment of vulnerability. And yet, the guilt gnawed at her, relentless and sharp. Mark called from his hotel room, voice distant and perfunctory. "How's everything?" "Fine," she lied. He didn't ask more. The call ended as abruptly as it had begun. Alone again, she sat on the edge of the bed, a hollow ache blooming in her chest. She'd grown used to Mark's absence, to the emotional vacancy that filled their marriage. But this incident with Liam, had stirred something raw, something she didn't understand and wasn't ready to face. The next morning, she caught Liam in the hallway, their eyes meeting briefly before he looked away. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. What could she possibly say? Her tongue felt heavy, her thoughts a tangled mess. As he walked past, she felt a strange mix of relief and loss. There was distance now, palpable, cold, but safe. Still, a question lingered, heavy and unresolved. Could one accidental moment undo years of trust, of love, of family? Elena didn't know. But she sensed something had shifted, something fragile had cracked. And in the silence that followed, she feared it might never mend. Days passed, each one thick with unease, like walking through fog that refused to lift. Elena busied herself with household tasks, moving with robotic precision, but her thoughts were no longer her own. They circled back, again and again, to that single, shattering moment. Her sleep became fragmented, her appetite vanished, and every creak of the floorboards sent her heart racing. Liam, too, had changed. He no longer lingered in the common spaces or joined her for meals. He slipped in and out of the house with quiet urgency, avoiding eye contact, avoiding her. When they did speak, their words were clipped, awkward. The warmth that once marked their bond was gone, replaced by a wall neither dared to breach. Elena couldn't take it anymore. One afternoon, as Liam prepared to leave, she stood at the foot of the stairs, clutching a folded towel in her hands, an unconscious gesture, as if she could somehow undo what had already been seen. "Liam," she said softly, voice strained. He froze on the second step, back to her. She could see his shoulders tense. He didn't turn. I want to talk," she continued, forcing the words out. "About the other day." A pause. Then, "There's nothing to talk about." His voice was low, guarded. "Yes, there is," she insisted, stepping forward. "I didn't know you were home." "It wasn't intentional." "I know." His response was immediate, but hollow, mechanical. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. "I don't want this distance between us," she said, almost pleading now. "It was an accident, nothing more." Liam finally turned, his face pale, conflicted. "I know that too. But it's still there. It happened. And I can't unsee it." His honesty cut deep. Elena nodded slowly, a lump rising in her throat. "I understand." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, the old familiarity flickered, then vanished. Without another word, he turned and left. Elena stood alone, the silence of the house closing in on her like a cage. She sank into the nearest chair, staring blankly ahead. What had once been safe, normal, had become fragile, broken. She had tried to bridge the distance, to explain, to make it right, but now she realized some moments can't be undone with words alone. Upstairs, the sound of the front door echoed, and she knew she was alone again. Her reflection in the window stared back, tired and worn. How had her life come to this? Misunderstandings, silences, and the growing fear that she had lost something she couldn't name. And yet, something still lingered, an unspoken hope that time, if not words, might heal the space between them. Spring sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting long golden lines across the floor. Elena stood at the sink, rinsing a coffee mug, her hands moving slowly, deliberately, as if the simple task could anchor her to a reality that still felt uncertain. Weeks had passed since that uncomfortable afternoon on the stairs, But the memory still lingered, shadowing every interaction, every silence. Liam had returned to his routines, but the air between them remained cautious. They coexisted with a mutual understanding, acknowledging the past without confronting it. It was safer that way. Yet beneath the surface, Elena sensed the wound had begun to close, forming a delicate scar. One Saturday morning, Liam entered the kitchen, the smell of toast and coffee filling the space. He glanced at Elena, hesitating, then offered a quiet, "Morning." Elena looked up, surprised by his tone, softer, less guarded. She offered a gentle smile. "Morning." He poured himself a cup of coffee, then sat at the table, tapping his fingers rhythmically against the ceramic. There was an energy in the room, subtle but different. Elena felt it. After a moment, Liam spoke, not meeting her eyes. "I've been thinking about everything." Her heart skipped. She waited, unsure. "I know it was an accident," he continued. "And I overreacted, distanced myself because I didn't know how to handle it. It caught me off guard." Elena swallowed the lump in her throat. "It caught me off guard too. I never meant for you to see that." I felt ashamed. Liam finally looked at her, his expression open. "You don't need to feel that way. You're my mother. You've always been there for me, and that hasn't changed." For the first time in weeks, the air cleared. The weight that had pressed on her chest eased, just a little. She nodded, blinking back emotion. "Thank you for saying that. I've missed us." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Me too." The room fell into a comfortable silence, the kind they hadn't shared in a long time. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. As Liam rose to leave, Elena watched him with a quiet sense of peace. They had faced an uncomfortable moment, weathered it, and come out intact. Life, she realized, was full of imperfect moments. What mattered was how they navigated them, with honesty, grace, and a willingness to heal. Later, standing by the window, coffee in hand, Elena allowed herself to breathe. The past could not be changed, but the future, that was still unwritten, and in that, there was comfort.